people say you can say everything, and my door is always open, but it doesn't work like that. It's not that people are doing that for like mean reasons or anything. It just doesn't work like that.
We tell stories for all sorts of reasons. We tell them to capture our history, we tell them to entertain ourselves, we tell them to show how much we're connected to one another. But stories can also tell us a lot about what's happening in our businesses and our organizations. The ways that employees experience their day to day lives can't always be captured in questionnaires or surveys or document reviews. And those stories reveal a lot more than we might be willing to believe. They help crack open challenges in organizations. They help turn on the light so that you can talk about things that may be difficult. And because of our interest here at Equitable, they help us help others tell the stories that are specific to their identities. Because if those stories are anonymous, then they can say what they need and they can be put together with other people's perspectives. Coming up, you're going to join a conversation with Augusto Cuginotti, who is a man dedicated to stories. He's dedicated to narrative inquiry and the ways that those stories can help organizations grow and change, and also help people get some sense of relief that their perspectives actually matter. I'm Dr. Adrienne Johnson Williams, and this is Equitable. Hello, Augusto. It's so great to have you.
Thank you, Adrian. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yay. So let's have you introduce yourself to our audience. First, who is Augusto as a human being? And then, what is it you're working on these days?
Super. Thank you. So, who am I? It's always a good question, right? So
Yes.
it comes with a lot of reflection. I think the way I see myself is a good of a wanderer, and I have a family which we've been wandering a little bit around the world, and I can tell about that later. But I have a wife and two kids, so this is obviously a great part of my identity and what is important to me. I've also moved around quite a bit. I was born and raised in Brazil, so I'm Brazilian, but I moved around to Europe for many years, and now I'm recently in the US. So also picking up a little bit of the cultural inputs from other places, apart from work, but also to live and to experiment this the diversity of the way people do stuff, which reflect eventually on work as well. I'm a father and a husband, and I have my hobbies on. I like martial arts. I've been doing for
Really?
more than 20 years. Yeah,
What
the
kind of
same
martial
thing.
arts?
I practice Aikido, which is
Mm,
a Japanese martial
yeah.
art. Very particular. There's a lot in around the world, so I always manage eventually to get in touch
Yeah.
with the teacher and continue practicing. So that's what I I do. I think it's a physical um, activity, and I like reading. I like studying. So I always end up, and I know you're the same. Like end up studying something else or going for
Mhm.
like courses and masters and whatever other things. But those kind of like searching for um, study and understanding and
Yeah.
in diverse areas, work a lot of
Uh-huh.
work, of course, but also in other things too. So I think that's me very curious about how things go, I think.
So before we get to your work, I'm curious about your name.
Mm,
So when I say your name to people, because I'm talking about you all the time, they ask, "Oh, he's Italian." And I said, "No, he's Brazilian."
yeah. So that happens a lot. So because the last name is Italian, indeed.
Yeah.
And the things I think like a part of their history is there was a lot of Italians in between the wars, particularly that went down to Brazil. So there's more Italians in Sao Paulo, descendants, no, but there are more descendants from Italians in Sao Paulo than in Rome. Every year, there's like 20,000 people who become Italians by descendant. So there's a lot of people with last names in Argentina, Brazil, and other places that are. So I had family from the south of Italy and from the south of Switzerland, actually, which is the north of Italy, so in both parts, the Italian part of Switzerland. My grandmother was born in Lugano, which is a beautiful place to visit. There's a beautiful lake, it's a mountain south, and she was like white hair, very, and that mixed up with the Brazilian side of indigenous from the other side of it. So anyway, and then I have curly hair, so it's very different
Yes.
from my grandmother. But anyway, so it's yes, so there's a lot of Italian. I ended up studying a little bit as a kid too,
Mhm.
although it's not really like a good. It's very conversational, basic Italian that I maintain. Yeah,
That's wonderful. I don't think I've ever asked you that question before in all these years. I just hear your name and you're from Brazil, and I tell you, tell people you're from Brazil. So, that's a great story. I'm glad to hear that. So, what are you working on these days?
I studied engineering when I was in my undergrad. Maybe because I liked like mathematics and physics. So it's the time of I think of my life, many people's lives that we don't I don't really know. It's too early. I have no idea. So I ended up going for engineering. And I found out that I wanted to work with people, which is a story by itself. And I ended up moving to work with participation and hosting spaces and facilitating. And that took me to organizations in at some point. I met groups of people who did this work with organizations, organizational development and doing interventions in many places. I've started studying that back in pretty much even before I left university. I found those crazy people in the place that I lived, and they did those kind of work. And I was very lucky as well because I found the people who in the country were connected to very interesting work, and that developed my understanding of organizations, of facilitation, and working with people. And eventually, so all this ended up a couple of decades later, maybe a little bit more white in my beard. Into the work that I'm doing now, which is a lot about still facilitating change in organizations, but I've also done work with municipalities and the government and some other and NGOs. But I've been adapting and working with collecting the narratives that people um, talk about the work that they're doing. So before I go to the organizations, I ask people to tell me how is it. Tell me about how work it's done in your organization, in your community, and let people do that anonymously so we can listen to eventually more people because most of the times we cannot have a lot of people in the room. So we get some representatives of the people where we can listen to more people by that way. So it's working with things that I was working before, but now adding this process, which is a great process called participatory narrative inquiry. So if you Google it, there's a lot of stuff and nice books written about it. Yeah.
Mhm. So, why is it you chose that approach when thinking about how to support your clients, organizations, businesses?
So I think that the approach is merging two things. One is a work that I was doing before, which is working with the here and now. And that comes from the system psychodynamics Tavistock tradition, which is to bring people in the room and collect data as data is produced, emerged in the group. So we listen to what people have to say. We listen to other things that might be happening. We call this in that tradition, use yourself as instrument. So we are so, and we probably heard about that. So is use ourselves as instrument in order to, and do people do that with coaching as well and other things. So this is one way of collecting data. But simple narrative inquiry, which is the newest one, which has been with me, it's been around for decades, but with me for maybe 7 years or so, is about listening uh, to how people see their workplace and how people see the community, how people see, in an understanding that I want to collect data not about how things are, but how people see things in organizations. It's a way of looking at, we call it a second order observation. So I'm observing how people observe organizing, the act of organizing. And that brings a lot of interesting. Sometimes it's not about what is; it's about what people interpret or what is through people. And of course,
Yeah.
it's important to know what is and be scientifically, uh,
You know
but
what's
also
interesting
important to
about
understand.
that
Yeah.
though?
Mm,
I'm curious. I often, we talk about how people's perception is their reality, but how people feel about what is and how they
mm,
act in reaction to what is, what they experience, right? Kind of defines the what is part, right? It's like this is how we're all
yeah,
interpreting it. This is how we're all acting. So you create something new as a result of even different groups of people entering and exiting the
yeah,
organization.
yeah. So I think a good distinction is it is not saying that what we think about the world will change the world, like in the secret kind of thing. Like if we think positively, that would. So not in that sense, but in the sense that some things, even if we don't know what is in the end, that doesn't like if it doesn't reach how people understand it, then you're going to still act from what you understand and know what is. And the opposite is also true. So if you look at like climate change, that there's a lot of documented data that there's something going on, but still people don't act in accordance to what is or what it seems to be from scientific perspective. They still act from other perspectives. So it's not enough to know what is, and even if we can know, which sometimes we cannot, but we also need to understand how people understand in
Yeah.
order to change to happen.
hmm I'm curious about something. When I first heard about what you were doing when we first caught up a year ago, year and a half ago, I was really excited about your work because I thought it had a lot of implications for the things that I'm really interested in, which is how do you get people who are unlikely to speak up for themselves because they feel unsafe for some reason or another, people who might be isolated because their numbers are few, for all sorts of reasons of identity. And what you presented really did offer a way for people's stories to really be captured and their perspectives to be shared. Can you say a little bit more about why the anonymity and then how it works once you collect and facilitate conversations?
So I became a big fan of this work, especially for many reasons. One is sometimes we would work with a group of people that were very diverse, and obviously the relationship we don't necessarily know the people that we're going to work with, and when we interview them, we create rapport, but we also can only see what we can see, and we can only show the identities that we are. So sometimes we work within indigenous communities that I don't have, like, there's not my identity. So I can relate at some level, like every human being, but I cannot relate some other level. And of course, we would have the advantage or the privilege of having someone, which is always great, from that identity, which is why we should have diverse groups of consultants and facilitators and all that. So it's really important. But again, in terms of scale, the idea of anonymity generates sometimes it's really hard for questions of identity, well, questions of difference of power, um, in a place that the people would be the whistleblower. Someone will raise their hand and say, I don't like this. This is not working well. And for many reasons, we cannot blame the person for not saying it because we know in the organizations that it's not, it doesn't, people say you can say everything and my door is always open, but it doesn't work like that. It's not that people are doing that for like mean reasons or anything. It just doesn't work like that in organizations. So one way to work with this would be to answer anonymously or to ask anonymously how people see it. So not as a place of complaint and a place of because obviously like if you're working as you do in organizations, there's a call line for unethical behavior or misogyny or so there's stuff that you need to call and say this is going on and we cannot so this is a different kind of channel. This is a channel to solve a question or a problem that is called a special problem. It is someone or a small group, they're doing something that needs to be mitigated or needs to be changed because they're doing something unethical, something that is not nice, etc. etc. But there's another one that sometimes people do things because they're invited and they collectively do things, and this is something more structural. And we can talk about like a structural disadvantage in many ways, and sometimes it's not pinned out in one person, and sometimes even unfair to pin out in one person. It's something that the person's been invited, some the privileged ones, and we not, don't even know that they're in that position of privilege and not allowing. So one way to understand this is to ask for everybody to tell their experience, to find the patterns of experience. So rather than finding the one, two, or even 10 people that have that experience, is to find a pattern of what's going on. And from a pattern of what's going on, we can open up a conversation that needs to happen. And what I've seen in the group is sometimes a person wouldn't say it, but when someone from the outside says, this seems to be a pattern, the person will raise their hand and say, I don't know who wrote that, but it resonates with me. So they will feel that they can say it because it's not about, it's like they're supporting something that it's out there. I'm not crazy. Other people also feel that way, or they also had that question, or they experienced this. And
People have permission. They have permission to speak up. I'm guessing that the questions you ask are open-ended and evocative, not, so like, tell me about what's wrong at this organization. So what are the kinds of questions that you ask that people have the opportunity to tell?
yes, it is an open-ended question. We want to know how people see things. So technically, you can go from like if you imagine the most possible open question, which allegedly people like in psychotherapy would do. You sit in a couch or whatever that thing is, and then the person will say, "You may begin," or "Tell me about I don't know, tell me about it," something like that. So it's just bring me whatever, and that and there's this, and there's the other side of being too restrict with your question that you actually kind of guiding the person to specific kind of things. So there's a place in between that is not uh, super open because it's not about therapy but it's also not too framed in a way that the person cannot bring what they want to bring because we want to hear what they want to bring. So we did work that we asked about how is it. Tell me about like how it's work in your organization, and it can be a something that people judge as positive, negative, neutral. It doesn't matter anything. And usually they have or we have multiple experiences. Some are good, some are not good, and you can tell more than one story. There's not a one story relationship with anything. Definitely not with the organization, but with someone else, etc. So we ask those questions, but we can ask a bit more. For example, one organization wanted to know why people were leaving the organization at some point in their career. So we can ask about, tell me about your career progression or your career or your the understanding how you experienced your career in the flow of this organization. So it's a little bit more specific, but still broad enough. So we want to know about careers because that's what the client wants to explore. But I'm not talking about specific things. I'm talking about
Yeah,
your
you're not
career.
asking, when do you plan on leaving?
Yeah. Or what was good. Or tell me a moment
Yeah.
that was good. Or tell me a moment, a turning point even. I'm just tell me about something that wasn't yeah, worth saying or an experience that you want to share.
And you manage the anonymity by people writing these stories down, right? It's not confidential, right? You're not just looking at people and asking them. You're giving them the opportunity in private to answer these questions without revealing their identity in any way.
The idea, the idea of anonymity is first, there's a lot of, when you're working with a client, it's important that we're generating we understand what's going to happen with the data because the data is always the client's data of the person and definitely the other, not you. But how this is going to be used in a way that we preserve because what we want, again, we want to understand the patterns of things. So whoever said A, B, or C does not really matter. It matters like if sometimes we ask people a bit of demographics because obviously like if we frame and you mentioned identity. If we ask the women in an organization and a man, there might be, and usually are, differences, for example, in career progression. So it's interesting for us to understand when we filter by the women or the men or people who are in the the central place of the organization and other places where it might be less important or less folk. So to understand that and to filter by those two can give us some insights and patterns to bring back to the client. But apart from that, it does. So we want to make sure that we don't filter, or it does not allow us to filter too much, so we can find like five people that. So one of those five people are told that story, and we don't want that because it doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve the trust of. It's not for that that we're inquiring, and doesn't serve the trust that people are already untrustworthy of surveys and all that stuff. So
It can
yeah.
really do harm.
Mm.
So, what's the most powerful story you've ever heard or read,
Most, mm, I
or
think,
most
yeah,
powerful finding from stories?
find it, find,
Mhm.
yeah. So I think before that, there's even like what we do is we look at this and we create possibilities. What this might mean because we don't know what it means because the person wrote and we cannot prove anything with it. So there was a teacher who did a lot of this work said we're not aiming to prove it. We're aiming to try to understand, open up a conversation about it. So, um, but there are there are possible hypotheses. I think there's some things that come up in some stories are touching because their stories usually of discovery or there's a bit of a twist in we're expecting one thing and then other things happen. We can see that like different organizations and communities and the different ways of dealing with things and drives. So in some we see a lot of care and a lot of respect in relationships. Some others are a bit more hierarchical, and then there's stories that break that. There are outliers that break that, and those are usually the interesting stories. Or the stories that we would make sure that we take the bit that does not obviously lead to the person who told, but that we use that as you have lots of stories like this, but you also have a couple of stories or a group of stories who are outliers about that. Let's talk about that because if you want that more, it would be you already have some. We're not creating out of the blue. You have a collaboration. You have people excited about this, or you have. So how can we make more of those? And or help people, or invite people to have more of those. So those outlier stories are usually the for the good and the bad. I think for the shocking thing, but also for the hopeful thing. It's yeah, the interesting ones. Yeah.
So, what you're saying is that you're not going to give me any detailed story.
I don't have I don't I but it's not because I can tell you because it's just I don't remember
Nothing
like a
comes right
specific
to mind.
I don't have a yeah, I have so like what I can say is I have stories that I remember, not because I can tell you, but I remember stories of we did work with a big NGO in volunteering. And so I had stories of people who went to protests where violence was going on and they managed to relate to the oppressor, to the police, militia, whatever was on the other side, in order to turn things around. Not for the whole thing, but for the micro environment they were, where the violence was about to happen, and they managed to turn things around. So there was a very powerful story of connection with the other, understanding what people were, and what can be done out of that. So
Oh, wow.
this was a very powerful kind of of like, what if we could do that in, of course, it's very contextual, but in other places where we could have a conversation with the person who was there to like to be the oppressor, and that could change things around.
So, it's
So
the power of empathy and perspective in the moment.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah,
Okay.
there was definitely there was a lot of that and a lot of discovering of the goodness. The other side is also present, right? But the ones that the inspiring ones of finding the empathy, but also how people care, even though they might not be. We don't identify them or we know who they are. So there are a lot of like invisible good people doing good stuff that we kind of get the stories. They're not public usually, but we get the stories sometimes from those collections.
So, oh, yes, I love stories about what it means to be human and the power it can have, this kind of shared humanity. From the other side of this, can you tell me about anything that an organization or business um, has done that maybe surprised you once they got a sense of the stories? Have you ever been surprised?
Absolutely, yes. I think I've been surprised. The client's been surprised. There's always a good number of hypotheses and possible patterns that the client will say, well, I've heard about this, or that makes sense, or doesn't make sense. And there's some that, and I think that those sometimes they're the juicy ones, but they're important conversations to happen because when you bring parties to collect that information, but parties to be there in a group facilitating and seeing how people respond to those inputs. And sometimes, so I had one that would say, "Oh, they didn't want to talk about it. It was a bit of a taboo style. We want to talk about the relationship between this part of the organization and that part of the organization." And they said, "We don't talk about this here." And usually that show up as a bit of a flag of there's something there that requires a conversation, but also to have, I think, the sensibilities in every place in organizations. There's defenses, like there's social defenses to deal with anxiety, to deal with, and sometimes they're there for a reason. Most of the times they're there for a reason. So I think as a young consultant, I thought my job was to go there with a big hammer and bring down the social defenses, so we could solve it and we could have the conversation that would everybody would be like there will be this big insight, and probably I'll be the hero, maybe,
Yes.
and yeah, and then I'll prove my worth and I'll get my money, something like that. And then I learned that it's not really that simple. Sometimes things are there for a reason, and then there's no hammer that would do good. Sometimes quite the opposite. The hammer would not only back to you, but back to other people.
And then
So
you would definitely not be the hero.
now that I'll probably be seen as the perpetrator, but more than that, it would hurt the organization as well. So you hurt the leader, you will hurt the people. So it needs to be so things take the time that they take. But it's interesting that back to your question, that sometimes just by raising it and saying those two groups. So if you want, based on what we've got here and the conversation that we've been having, if you want to move what you're worried about forward, this conversation needs to happen. It might not be now. It might require preparation. Maybe we can talk more about what this preparation might look like. How we can create a little crack so the conversation might start, but this might not go forward if we don't talk about this. Because it goes back to, so to say to the client, everything else that we've been talking about, when we peel the onion, it goes back to this. So this seems to be, I cannot prove it, but it seems to be something that if we don't talk about it, it's going to block everything else. And then sometimes that's where you can get, because they're not used to or they're not ready to have the conversation. And I think the job is, for me, the job has been, how can I do a soft landing of those patterns that can open up possibilities, so conversations that wouldn't happen, and then have the faith in the conversation that if the conversation happens when it's time, then people coordinate differently and things might move along. New actions might happen, and yeah.
What fascinates me really most about your work, particularly as it relates to my interest in equity and creating racial equity in particular, but equity in general in organizations, is that the way that some of us in the industry try to understand organizations is through the examinations of policies and procedures and through large scale surveys and questionnaires, and reviewing things like HR findings or HR complaints. And while I think that can be useful and it can be part of a comprehensive review, what really interests me about your approach is that because you're gathering stories anonymously and because you're leaving it to people to really talk about the things that are of interest to them, it creates another powerful layer to understanding issues of race and identity and safety. On that front, I just want to say thank you. Because when I found
It's
out
not
about it, it was
exclusively
like
my
this
work,
moment
but
of
I think it's, yes.
what? I think you might remember that. Me going, what? I want this. I want it. I must have it. And so now you have both your general approach, your business culture sprint, yes. And you've now kind of started thinking about a more technological approach to doing this, which I also really appreciate. And we don't have to talk about that now. You can come back and talk about it when it's fully fleshed out and ready to go out into the world. But I'm really grateful for that as well. Back on the issue of equity, though, as you're doing your work or as you're moving through the world, what's your definition of equity? How do you define it?
That's a good question. I feel it's a bit tricky because you know all about this. And yeah, um,
There's no right or wrong answer on
there's
this
no right or wrong
podcast.
answer. But yeah, I think my reflection on looking at equity and and diversity and how I've seen in different places is what is really behind the opportunities people have. Yeah, and the access people have. Considering not only, which sometimes is the case, the short term of like what you can get now, but also the historical where you're coming from and what you've been given and how people see you and all the issues of identity that we know. And then understand that what is equity in that perspective that we know it's not being all the same. There's no equality, and but it's generating or is allowing what I'll call access. We're allowing the relationships and the access to the world in whatever fashion that might be, in a way that relates or is distributed like in other people, which we know in this case in this world as it is now, it's that most definitely not the case. I think the most important thing is to go beyond, for me, when you look at equity, is to go beyond the short term and look at how things been built, how things been constructed, how things been, because we come from a very, I don't know if lineage, but we come from, we only know what we've been told and the relations we had. So we speak from a place of what people told us and what we can access. And sometimes I usually say to people like, I've never been a woman, so I cannot speak from that place. And the only way I can access a little bit or some of it is in relationship with people who are. And even though I can understand to a point, and vice versa in different levels and everything. So yeah, I think
I
around
appreciate
and
how you
around, I
went
think that's it.
I appreciate how you went back to story in terms of like how we understand things and the lineage and the stories we've been told. One of the ways that I talk about it is that no matter how much we try to separate ourselves, we are tethered to all of those things that came before us. We are attached to them. And so as much as we want to either deny or erase the idea of structures or the things that have been built over time, they're in us, they're attached to us, we can't get away from it. So either we deal with it or we are delusional in thinking they don't exist. It's like, so, oh, I really like that. I like the way you explain that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It
So,
was my first
Augusto,
time.
if people want to follow you or find you on the interwebs, I know I enjoy following you on LinkedIn because you start these really philosophical conversations, or you go out there and slap down other people's
Oh
philosophical
my God.
assertions. I see
It's
you.
aim
I
of
see you out
learning.
there.
It's aiming for learning, not for.
So, how should people follow you? Where should they look for you?
I want to do and I've learned to do the minimum because I didn't want to be too much on. So what I do and where you can find me is on LinkedIn. So I'm there. Hopefully not too much, but enough to tell the story. And the website, sometimes I host conversations and webinars with uh, with other people that do this work, so we can explore a little bit more. and of course the website. And I'm always up for a chat if people want to explore this topic. It's always great to beyond exchanging messages and LinkedIn posts and philosophical to see what people are doing, because the aim of this is to create interventions and to create a way of being in the world that allows participation and allows creating space, which is what I like. So
Mhm. And what's the website?
there's the website with my name that goes with. So if you go to augustocuginotti.com, my name
There you
like it's
go.
in here. Then there's all my facilitation work. There's Culture Sprint, which is a specific process to work with culture. And eventually there's going to be this online also platform to help people to use this work. There are many platforms around there, but this is, well, I thought it was a good idea to create one for consultants and facilitators. So that's where I'm aiming at.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I hope people look you up.
Sure.
I do so appreciate your work. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for having
Mhm.
me. And thank you for everybody who's listening to